Welcome back. Our focus in this session is the pastoral relationship, how it is established, the relevant rules and procedures, including very recent changes approved by the General Council Executive for the context of COVID-19 and social distancing. And there are a variety of resources to help us work through what this has meant up to this point in the United Church of Canada. These include the United Church Manual and the report and recommendations contained in the document entitled Effective Leadership. The pastoral relationship is the umbrella term for how ministry personnel and congregations are linked up. It's a significant piece of our Congregationalist and Presbyterian heritage that the pastoral relationship, when initiated by call, is without time limit. The other way in which personnel and pastoral charges are formally linked is through appointment. Appointments are always time limited, generally to 1 year, but could be 2 years or 3 years with the approval of the region. And of course, appointments can be renewed if both parties are in agreement. It's a significant commitment of United Church polity that the pastoral relationship be without interruption. That means that, as much as possible, congregations are not without ministry personnel. Now, some degree of interruption is unavoidable during a vacancy, for instance, but it's accepted that it's not a healthy state of affairs for the pastoral relationship for some sort of ministry designated for every congregation, for that to be disrupted for any length of time. And we know, of course, that there are places where it does continue for some time because there's a shortage of available ministry personnel. But a lot of concern arises when communities of faith are without ministry for years. That can be related to an inability to secure clergy, generally because of isolation or the inability to afford full-time terms of employment. One issue that arises is that pastoral charges are able to pay the amount required by the various charts and standards of payment, but they aren't able to afford the moving costs. That's a place where sometimes the region or the national church can step in and help. Now, our default position has been one minister for one congregation or pastoral charge. That's been the default position since 1925. In recent years, we know conditions have changed quite rapidly, but our responses have lagged. The norm is still to call full-time call, full-time appointment to a single pastoral charge. But the numbers of such possibilities continue to diminish. At the same time, we have continued to use minimum salary standards, in part to protect those elements of what we consider to be sustainable long-term ministry. We have not been terribly effective in widely exploring other models of ministry. The amount or proportion of part-time ministry has accelerated rapidly in the last 10 to 15 years, from being 3 or 4% of pastoral charges within, say, a region to 50% and more. One of the aspects of our changing system is that the strong distinction between call and appointment is beginning to blur. Many communities of faith are in fact engaging in what we might call serial appointments with different categories of ministry personnel: students, candidates, designated lay ministers, and retirees who are not eligible for call. So, with your experience to this point, what would you say are some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses of each call and appointment? There are some fairly clear steps for changing a pastoral relationship. I'm not going to go through them word for word because you can see them for yourself in Manual Section I. Either the ministry personnel or the community of faith can initiate a change. Let's look at the congregation steps first. There needs to be a meeting of the community of faith, and you can find the rules for that meeting at section B.5.3. Who can call the meeting? When they have to call a meeting. Often in these cases it is after a request by a certain number of members. And when the meeting must be held. And these are all very clear requirements. Step 2, it's important to remember that the regional council liaison has to be at that meeting. It used to be that the presbytery rep had to chair the meeting, but that's no longer the case. It just requires the regional liaison person to be present. The people who requested the meeting need to be heard. The ministry personnel has the right to be heard. And assuming that the vote is positive, the community of faith votes to change the pastoral relationship. Then the following things kick in. The ministry personnel is entitled to advance notice of the change. In other words, they are entitled to 90 days advance notice or 90 days salary and benefits in the same amount as payable before the change. In other words, if the pastoral charge says, we want you gone tomorrow, the pastoral charge must still pay the 90 days salary and benefits. And that includes use of the manse, if there is one. Then what happens? Well, every employee of the community of faith, clergy or not, needs to be informed that this change has taken place. The regional council needs to be informed in writing of the decision, and then the regional council has to review the situation, the decision that was made, and affirm or deny the request for a change in pastoral relations. Fortunately, those sorts of changes are relatively rare because they almost always leave a residue of bad feeling. It's far more common that the ministry personnel initiates the change, in which case she has to give a minimum of 90 days notice to the community of faith. If it's a shorter period than 90 days, both the community of faith and the region need to agree. What happens next? Well, the region then appoints a liaison person to assist the community of faith. The liaison person does not have to attend every meeting, but should be consulted in discussions around the pastoral relationship, for support in developing the living faith story, consulted when the writing of the community of faith profile begins, when a search team is appointed, when there is a meeting to receive a recommendation, and at the covenanting service. So what is this community of faith profile? The intention is that the profile will be regularly kept up to date, which means that there shouldn't be huge amounts of effort expended at the time of a pastoral relations change. How many communities of faith will actually do this when it's not immediately needed or required remains to be seen. The regional council liaison makes sure in working with the governing body that the profile is complete. The purpose of the community of profile is to articulate the faith's community's witness to the gospel. It's to articulate the ministry needs of the community of faith and summarize the community of faith's resources and the community context. And so a community of faith profile is considered complete when it includes the living faith story, demographics of the congregation, an account of the financial viability and real property, a position description or descriptions of multiple positions if it's a team ministry or a multi-staff ministry, a manse report if that's applicable, and learning site requirements if those are applicable. When you post the profile to the Church Hub, you have to make some choices to help clergy narrow down the options available to them. First of all, there's a question of regional availability. You, as ministry personnel, what regions are you prepared to live and work in? How far are you prepared to move? Hours, full-time or part-time. Are you looking for full-time or part-time work? Are you, as a community of faith, able to offer full or part-time salary? The best starting date, which is, of course, negotiable. Is there a manse or a housing allowance? Is this a recognized supervised ministry education site? Is it solo or team ministry? Is it considered urban, suburban, or rural? Should it be considered an ethnocultural or linguistic specific community of faith? And we do have a number of those within the United Church of Canada. Is it an indigenous community of faith? And is it an affirming community of faith? And so you can fix those filters into the system so that you can see the sort of congregation that you might be seeking to serve. Or you might be able to particularly attract ministers who are interested in serving your community. You don't have to use those filters. The filters are just there to make it easier for faith communities and potential clergy to connect with one another. What else needs to happen? Well, the governing body is responsible for naming a search team. The governing body itself could serve as the search team. It could be a special team of people, or it could theoretically be the whole congregation, depending on the numbers in each case. And the regional council is responsible for training the search team. Ministry personnel profiles are posted on Church Hub, and only communities of faith that are in a search process may see profiles of ministry personnel who are in search of a call or appointment. So what does the search team do? Well, they use Church Hub to search for ministry personnel. They create a short list of ministry personnel to interview, and they invite those personnel to an interview. They complete first round interviews and shortlist for a second round of interviews. They do reference checks for ministry personnel who are moving on. They hold the second round interviews. They discern through conversation and prayer the most faithful decision about a successful applicant. They contact the successful applicant and they begin to negotiate. They inform ministry personnel who were not successful, and that's really important. If you're working with a congregation as a liaison, please make sure that they contact people who are not successful. It's just a matter of courtesy, but it's really not fun to discover down the road that a congregation to which you made application in good faith has gone ahead and called somebody else and they didn't even bother to let you know. The first thing you know about it is when you hear that somebody else has received the call. It's not pretty. It's not good. It's just a really good thing to keep up communication. Even if the communication says, well, we're not really able to make a decision at this point, well, at least let the person know. So you've informed ministry personnel who were not successful. Then the search committee extends a call or appointment to the successful applicant, contingent, of course, on the agreement of the congregation and the region. And they make a recommendation, including the negotiated terms of call or appointment to the community of faith. So the search committee brings to a congregational meeting a recommendation for one person. They can't bring a variety of names and have the congregation haggle them out. It's the job of the search committee to make those decisions, to negotiate those terms, and present a single name. And so the role of the governing body is to request a meeting of the community of faith to consider the recommendation. The regional council is responsible to attend that meeting via a representative, who is usually the liaison person, and decide whether or not to approve the call or appointment. That's all on the side of the community of faith. Meanwhile, the ministry personnel has their own tasks. There are 4 stages in changing a pastoral relationship generally. The first is to request a change. Second, to update and file your personnel profile on Church Hub, the search and selection, the covenant through worship. Now, each ministry personnel has an online ministry page at churchhub.ca. The General Counsel Office populates all the ministry personnel with profiles with basic information like name, address, phone number, and email address, and so on. And you are free to update the basic information at any time you want. Other information will be available and updated through ministry personnel's Church Hub page. Things like yearbook information, record of service, calls or appointments, record of professional requirements, annual declaration, boundaries, training, racial justice profile, ministry profile, and so on and so forth. When you're discerning a change in pastoral relations, you need to update your profile. Ministry personnel can update their profile at any time, even when they're not discerning a change in pastoral relations. Why? Why would you do that? Well, maybe you've completed a continuing education course, or you've done some sort of training that you want to add to your profile or resume, and it's often easier to do it at the time than to try and remember back 2, 3, how many years when it's time to update your profile. You can request support from your Office of Vocation Minister when updating your profile if you can't get things to fit in or whatever. The purpose of the profile, your ministry profile, is to articulate your own individual witness to the gospel, to articulate your individual sense of call to ministry, and it also affirms your being in good standing with the denomination. You're ready for search and selection when you have skills and gifts profiled, you have a resume, and you have a record of eligibility which is provided by the Office of Vocation. For the most part, that's a rubber stamp. If you're not in good standing, it's usually as a result of some process that you've been notified of. It's almost unthinkable that you would go to do something like that and all discover out of a clear blue sky that you're not in good standing. So at the point of posting the profile to the Church Hub, again, you need to check some filters, tick off some boxes to match your profile and assist communities of faith in searching for ministry personnel. So, for example, what is your ministry status? For most of you on this, looking at this video, it will be as ordained minister, or it may be candidate supply. But there may be other things. Are you looking for full-time or part-time hours? How available are you? How far are you prepared to move? What languages do you speak? Are you a designated intentional interim minister? Are you a certified supervisor? So it's the job of the Office of Vocation Minister to make sure that your ministry personnel profile meets the purpose of the profile, contains the required elements and as outlined in the policies, and the search process begins once your ministry personnel profile is completed and posted as available for call or appointment on Church Hub. Who can see your profile? There's a lot of concern about this aspect of Church Hub, and you may want to give it some consideration. A ministry personnel profile that is posted as available for call or appointment can be seen by communities of faith that are in search and have their own profiles posted. Communities of faith that are in search can see the profiles of other communities who are also searching. Ministry personnel who are in the process of search may not see the profiles of other ministers who are in the process of search. Now, these restrictions are intended to maintain a level of confidentiality in the search process, and members of the search teams must agree to keep the search process confidential. The challenge for this, and I offer this simply as something for you to think about, is that many people who are pondering, discerning a call to change their location for ministry may use a search of what is available to provide some element for that discerning process. So sometimes, let me give you for instance. Suppose you are feeling restless, dissatisfied, bored, whatever language you want to use, with your current location. Sometimes part of the discerning process is to take a look around, to see what else is out there. Is there something that calls to you? And just as often as that leads to a ministry personnel changing their ministry location, it also can lead to ministry personnel saying, gee, this place is pretty good. I'm okay here. Maybe I can respond to that restlessness that I'm feeling by doing something different here rather than moving someplace else. We do know from all sorts of statistical evidence that it requires approximately 18 months for a pastoral relationship to be recovered to the place of the pastoral relationship that was before it. By that I mean to say, if you depart at a good point in your ministry relationship, if you depart at a good point, it will be 18 months at least before your successor and that congregation return to the same sort of health in relationship. And in that time, programs, participation, stewardship all tend to lag. So a pastoral change, while it's many times it's necessary and good and healthy, entails a cost as well, a cost of the congregation that's sometimes not thought about. So the ministry personnel may be looking at other places to discern whether God is calling them away or calling them to stay. The challenge with the church hub search process is that the only way you can know what is available, at least through the system, is by saying that you're available for call. Yes, people are supposed to keep things confidential, but human nature being what it is, it's not uncommon that something will leak. I've had that experience in the previous situation. I went out of town for an interview. By the time I got back home from that interview, the chair of the committee of stewards in the congregation that I was currently serving had had a call from a member of the committee where I had the interview saying, "Oh, I hear your minister's leaving." I had not said anything at that point. And that can be extremely damaging to a pastoral relationship. So it makes it very difficult for folk to use that what's available method of adding to discernment. So if you are searching for a new call or appointment, you are responsible to use Church Hub to search for communities of faith that match your desired profile, contacting the communities of faith, responding to communities of faith that request interviews, completing interviews, discerning through conversation and prayer a decision about a call or appointment, either telling that congregation or that search committee when you've decided not to pursue the call or appointment, negotiating in good faith with the search team about the terms of the call or appointment, communicating the request for a change in pastoral relations to their current community of faith after, and then letting the region know and signing the call or appointment form. So there's several steps. And again, it's a matter of good faith. If you've decided in good conscience that you can't pursue or you don't feel called to pursue a particular invitation, let the search team know. It's not always fun to do, but it's a lot harder when they get more invested in you. It works the same way with search committees. If you're not interested in somebody, don't keep them hanging on. Set them free, because they're also seeking to discern God's will. It's important to time the notification of your community of faith very carefully. In the normal course of things, and of course for students things are not always normal, in the normal course of things, you really want to have an approved call or appointment in hand before you notify your congregation, which means that, backing up a step, you will have negotiated the terms of the call or appointment with the search team in the new congregation. They will have gone to a congregational meeting with your name. The congregation will have voted to approve that call, and you are informed. And at that point, you're safe to let your congregation know. If you do it beforehand, you always run the risk that the congregation may say no to the search committee. And that does happen. And that leaves you, if you've already informed your current congregation that you want to end the pastoral relationship, if you have to go back and tell them, oh, guess what, it was a mistake. Well, you can get some idea of what that's going to do with your pastoral relationship. So keeping that in order is really important. Now, during this time of physical distancing, the General Council Executive has approved changes to the rules which, in effect, allow the governing body to make the decisions that fall to the community of faith. So, if a community of faith cannot gather for a meeting, the governing body is to consult as best it can with the community of faith before deciding. In other words, the congregational meetings that we have been talking about have been set aside for a brief period of time. The regional council's role is still in place, as are the 90 days provision. The temporary provisions make reference to a temporary layoff. This can only happen with the agreement of the regional council after checking all the options. You can find that information on the United Church website at this link. So those are the basic details of the pastoral relationship. It can be a very exciting, it can be a very tense time, it can be a time when we want to rush forward with things. It can also be a time when we need to just stop and breathe, spend time in prayer and discernment, talk to those whom we trust, seek for the wider guidance. Hope that's been helpful, because we all do go through it, sometimes multiple times in the course of a career in ministry.